now we can move along to our next talk, and we have a person who's an expert in many areas. And I was just checking out his website, and it's impressive the amount of things that a person can do if they maximize their time. So I'm very curious to ask him about his time management skills as well, because it seems like he's able to get a lot done in the time that he's allotted. So we have Geert Bevin, who is the software engineering and software product manager at Moog Music, and also the Linstrument principal software engineer and a maker, singer, guitarist, biker, and Kung Fu. You didn't put Kung Fu master, so I'm wondering if you've
No, I'm not a master. No, I'm not a master. I haven't mastered. I'm just a student.
Even a master, even a master wouldn't call themselves a master. They'd say that.
No, well, actually, kind of do. Yeah, Sifu. Thanks, Josh. Thanks for introducing me. Yeah. And thanks for that previous talk, guys. I thought that was really interesting. I just want to tie it back to when I was working on the Eigenharp 10 years ago. I don't remember what the time frame was. It was really interesting how just like the basic physical modeling string models could become so much more just by using a different control mechanism. Just by giving them a different excitation source and being able to introduce some elements of chaos that is not computer generated, but is tied to human inputs of high enough resolution and precision. It was very exciting to see that come to life. And then later, like Roger and I discovered when we just hooked up Linstrument to Logic Sculpture, who's been around since, I don't know when, like it's been around since forever. Sculpture all of a sudden sort of like opened up into new domains because these models can adapt to how you excite them, how you drive them, and then you get these very interesting like areas that influence each other, where you discover spaces in the sounds that you can't get to with samples, like what you said, but that you can get to with these like new control mechanisms that are coming out. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. So what I hear you saying, if I'm interpreting you correctly, is that it's not only the instrument, but it's also the actual interaction with the instrument as well. That's important.
It is, in my opinion. I feel like that's a big part of acoustic instruments is what your human relationship is with the object that you're using, and it can be everything. It can be like I'm obviously an acoustic guitar player, but like it's like how do you rest your arm on your guitar? Like where do you position yourself in the room to hear the reflection of the sounds? Are you what types, like how old are your strings? How new are your strings? How like are you how do you file your nails when you? That's my big thing. Like how do you find your nails when you attack the strings? And do you have a little piece of skin that is there at the beginning of the attack to sort of have a little bit of dampening while you have still your like the excitation of your nail? Like all these things are part of triggering the sound. And I think we're just like at the beginning of digital audio, digital music, with like the controllers getting to a point where some of these things can be achieved.
And that's really interesting, because I think about a lot of composers, like look at producers like Skrillex, who are just able to make music on a laptop. It's like the laptop's an interface, and the way that you interact is really compelling and really contributes to a lot of the ways that decisions are made in the way that you compose a song. DAWs as well. Yeah, that's really interesting. Where do you see these interfaces going in the future? We've jumped straight in the deep end.
I mean, I'm in the midst of it, so sometimes it's a little bit hard to sort of like peek out and look like how far the forest goes. I don't know. I feel we're just at the beginning of what all of this could be. Like we've had only a couple of years, like we had the MPE specification that we finalized, which finally sort of codified something that people were doing, but nothing was written down. So it was a little bit difficult to get the controllers and the sound sources to understand each other well. But that to me is just like opening the door to MIDI 2.0, which is really only just getting started. And like once we're in that MIDI 2.0 space, I figure like in 10 years or so, when we have like controller sources that are not limited by 7 bits, where you're not limited by like an effective usable space of maybe like 80, 90 CC messages, where everything is not like channelized in 16 MIDI channels. Like all these limiting factors, I think, are still very much imprinting what you said, like what the DAWs allow you to do, what people are able to hook up to each other, like what is understood by the different modulation matrices. Like all of these things are very much inform and limit what can happen. I feel like MIDI 2.0 can radically change all of that. So I just hope that we're getting more and more weird instruments and weird controllers out there so that people can very experiment with these spaces, and like what you said, Stefan, like find that niche in the parameter space where like, okay, but like if I put my palm down and then like rub with my 3 fingers on that edge of this particular digital surface and I hook it up to that physical model, like, oh, it sounds so awesome. Like it would be like, I think it will get there where you're not feeling like you're limited by what the digital connections allow you to do, but where you feel free to sort of like let your emotions go and just this like disappear, find yourself disappear in that exploration.
That's amazing. And do you and that brings me to the point that you're working with 2 companies, Roger Lynn and Moog, who have been very instrumental in how we listen to music today with Moog synthesizer, with the Akai MPC. And how do you continue that legacy? How do you continue moving forward from where things have gone? So Moog have gone of course, with their signature sound. How do you take that and continue the legacy and say, yes, but we can go further? How do you do that as an engineer?
It's a really good question. Moog's culture is really strong internally, and also the musicians that we work with. A big part of it, of making Moog instruments, is feeling what Moog instruments are about, and part of that is very much informed by the musicians that are using the instruments. Like Bob was collaborating a lot, like even at the beginning, just like coming up with the first modular, with the first mini Moog was all being like done through musicians' feedback, like collaborating with Herb Deutsch and getting all of these elements in place for actual useful musician, like allowing musicians to perform with what the engineer creates. And obviously there's a vocabulary that came out of that, which is a subtractive synthesis model, and which like is very familiar workflow of like having the oscillators going through, like with the envelope generators and the filters. Like we all know that, and then the typical Moog sound. My personal take on this is, and it's also like, it's sort of how I approach a lot of my projects, is it's often very, very hard to completely radicalize and revolutionize everything, because as a human, you're very easily overwhelmed. Like if you have nothing that you can feel connected to, nothing that you can sort of gain a foothold with, it's way less comfortable to take a risk in other areas. So if you feel like you're completely free floating in everything that you're experiencing might not be as comfortable to be creative with. So with the projects that I've done with Roger and then that we're doing with Moog, we just try to explore a few new elements. Like, what if we take this particular architecture and then make that more modular? What if we put it on an iPad? What if we take existing sound sources and then allow you to, like with Animal, like allow you to explore them with finger gestures? Or what if you make a traditional like Moog modular polyphonic and MIDI controllable? Like there's just a few parameters, just a few aspects of what is known changes. And then you can also evaluate sort of like what the benefit of it is. Like, did that work? Did that actually go into something that is worthwhile exploring further? And sometimes, like, you get, like all the time, you get a lot of feedback from musicians, like, okay, well, that's interesting. Now we have more information to explore this, and we know what to explore further, as opposed to, okay, well, everything's new, so now, like, I don't know where to go next. So yeah, I think it's basically, we talk a lot also internally at Moog, like everyone's super passionate about synths, everyone uses the synths, but everyone still has their own preferences. We all use other gear, obviously, like not necessarily Moog gear, but also Moog gear. And then like we have our preferences, and we're sort of like riff on each other and figure out like what works well with the elements of the Moog vocabulary that we know and that people love, and sort of drive it further, like step by step, like what we did with the Moog 1. It's like first Moog poly, and like since the poly mode, like wow. We didn't change everything. We didn't change that voice structure, right? But still modified in certain areas. And like we have a whole digital effects section, and we get an LCD. You know, we never had like an LCD like that on a Moog instrument before. What does that open up?
Can I jump in and ask a question there?
Sure.
So you're speaking about the specific feeling of using a Moog.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a bit about what are some considerations that you make when you're translating into like a virtual analog version, mm-hmm. in terms of like how the interface should feel, and when you're designing the interface, like how users get that feeling that you're speaking about of using the product?
It's very I'm just speaking for me, right? Like I can't speak for the Moog engineering team as a whole, how they do that. Like I just speak from my own experience here. It's very non-scientific. Like I have this memory from when working on the Model 15 app, where I had the original Model 15 sitting next to me. I had the first really well working version on an iPad Pro also next to me. And I would like go through and I was like, okay, if I turn this knob and close my eyes, even though the tactile feel is not the same, but you still get that kind of feedback loop. Like, what if I turn this knob? Does the sound generate a similar kind of emotional response in me? And what if I play notes at the same time? Does it still make me feel connected? Can I get to the places I need to get to be able to freely explore what my creativity would be? Like these type of concerns, I feel, are just as important in instrument design as like the DSP model of the sound. Obviously, like we worked a lot on that too, and there was a few things there that sort of like made it bloom open, as opposed to like initially we were modeling the modules by themselves. It's not component level modeling, but module level modeling, and things sounded okay, but somehow it sort of didn't gel, until all of a sudden we realized that we hadn't modeled the impedances between the different models, and how the actual like ports had different impedances between different outputs and different inputs. And once we started taking that into account, you got like specific like saturation characteristics that started coming into play, and like what the different ranges are of how the CV signals are controlling aspects of that particular sound module. all of a sudden it got way closer. So there's a lot of like trying it out and sort of putting musician hat on. Like, okay, does this feel inspiring? And trying to sort of self-reflect. Like, it's not inspiring yet. Why might it not be inspiring? And then talk about it with the other people on the team. Say, what was your experience? And cool thing is, and sometimes you come up with a completely new idea. Like, hey, what if we do this? Like, there was a few instances in Moog Z's development. It's like, hey, what if we add this and we added that? It's like, wow, yeah, this is just like opens it up completely. Like, the example there is like the Z mult. We have Z mult parameter on Moog Z. So Moog Z is basically the original Moog. We took it to the third dimension. You have comets that rotate around a path and an orbit, and they were two-dimensional in the original Moog. Now they're three-dimensional, but the timing of the Z timing was tied to the X and Y timing. So you basically just always had these planes that would just be shifting a little bit, and also sonically, you wouldn't really feel that it was that different. And then, like, okay, why are we not getting something more interesting out of it? And all of a sudden, like, oh, but we need to be able to change the timing of the Z axes also, but in relationship with the X and Y axes. And that Z mult all of a sudden opened it up, and you get these crazy shapes and also crazy modulations in the Z domain. But that only came up through experimentation, just trying it out. I was like, okay, these presets sound too similar. What is necessary? What is missing? So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, for sure. Really interesting answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And you brought up a great a great thing with the Moog, which was that you found new ways for musicians to be able to interact with with Moog and what it is as a sound or as a feeling. And I'm wondering, this is something that came from the chat as well, with a person named Along the Arc, who's a person in our chat, asking about haptic feedback and things like VR. How do you think that's going to affect the way that we interact with sound and interact with music?
Haptic feedback is absolutely essential. It's part of your own personal feedback loop. So I personally experimented with this quite a bit when I was working with the Leap Motion Controller and creating a piece of software that allows you to use the Leap Motion Controller to control synthesizers. And haptic feedback was a problem and still is. If you're moving around in air, you lose your reference point. So what we have with physical instruments, if you always have a physical reference point, you always have something that allows you to go back and sort of self-correct whenever something happens. It's one of the reasons why playing fretted instruments is so much easier than unfretted instruments, because you've got the frets that are a physical reference point. But still, you also have strings and you have the neck in unfretted instruments. But if you're completely in the air, that's sort of where I was going with that, but the Leap Motion Control wasn't able to support that. That's sort of what I came, it's just one realization, but I don't know if it's the right one. It's just like something that I came to, is like, you can be your own reference point. And I was getting to that spot where people were asking me, how can you do gesture control and trigger notes? And you have all these like ideas that come out, like, what if you've got virtual strings in the air and you just move your hand back and forth? Like, that's cool once, but you can't really perform with that. And like, what if you have a space around yourself and you subdivide it in like pie charts, whatever, and like this section is that note and this section is that note? Well, the problem with accelerometers and gyroscopes is that they drift. So all of a sudden that space is not the same anymore. So you really don't know where you are. And the same thing like with the infrared camera, with the Leap Motion, it's also not super precise and limited. So then you're like in this limited space, and like, so the next step that I was going to do, but the technology prevented it at that point, was I felt, and similar to when you play a flute was a really good example. You open and close the valves. You can be that reference point with your own fingers. You could just be mimicking in the air, say, okay, this is this note, and now it's another note, and like as if you create these combos that you play on a wind instrument. And I think that's still something that is being explored in VR. If you lose your tactile reference points, but also lose your visual reference point, and that's, again, my personal experience, I feel very lost most of the time. Like, if I would have to be creative in that space where and also you lose your sonic reference point, where you're basically free floating in virtual reality without haptic feedback and without like these reference points, I think it's hard. So I think we still have ways to go there. However, AR might be interesting. There's like some ideas that I've been like thinking about there, where you can still use your visual reference point, and you could still like use physical objects, but have the virtual reality overlay on top of that and sort of augment what you already know and what you're already doing. Or maybe augment the experience that the audience has, so that you can have influence over non-physical visual and audio manifestations that are being generated over AR, but still using the physical world as part of your reference point, so that you can get into that feedback loop and self-correct and sort of be that in that creative mind space as a musician.
Mm-hmm. One question I wanted to ask, completely off the subject, is you have a lot of similar looking guitars back there, and I was wondering, always wondered with guitar players, what's the difference between them? In a blind test, would you be able to tell, or do they sound different?
They sound different, but they also have an emotional connection. Let's see. That first one is a guitar that my dad bought me. And it's a rootsy sounding guitar that sounds really good with open tunings. So I tuned it down a little bit. It's got this nice sort of, I don't know, rootsy, smoky kind of additional sound to it. The other one is the same brand, but I bought it as my first good guitar that I bought myself. So it's also like, oh, wow, I invested in my first great guitar. So yeah, but it's brighter sounding, more stable. It's a little bit of a bigger body. The high strings are sort of like pure sounding and can like have sort of like a bell quality to it. This Martin is like the one that's sort of behind, is the first guitar I bought when I came to the United States. So it's also like, I need a guitar when I'm in the hotel. I'm just going to leave it around at Moog, and then I'll just pick up my guitar when I stay in the hotel because I need to have a guitar. And it took me a whole day to find that. Like, just sat in the music shop here and just tried all of them out. I was like, this is the one that sounds so good. And then I have a Santa Cruz guitar over there. That's my favorite sounding one, because it's got a lot of overtones. And it's also like an expensive guitar, and like as an engineer, the first time I could afford like a really expensive guitar, it's like, okay, well, I'm attached to that. And I felt so proud that I could finally afford a guitar like that. But also, I was not planning on buying it. I actually went into the guitar shop to try out the guitar behind it, because that is a special guitar also. This one has got VO 96 mounted on it, which sort of technology that was used for the Moog guitar also, which allows for like infinite sustain on every string. And I was in Belgium at the time, and also they allow like timbral variations and arpeggio over different string sustain levels. I was in Belgium at the time, and I had backed the VO 96. I think it was a Kickstarter campaign. But I needed to order a guitar in the US that Paul Vaux would mount that in and send it to Belgium. So I needed to find a guitar that I knew existed in the US, but I could try out in Belgium. And And so I went to the shop to try that one out. And then the shop owner was like, I hear you play, you should go downstairs and try these Santa Cruz. And I was like, oh my God, don't do that to me. And I couldn't get that guitar out of my head. And so, yeah. So they all have a story. They all also have a reason why I keep them around. I like playing different tunings, and it is also convenient to leave your guitar in that tuning instead of like changing between. Like there's drop D is fine, but changing between open C and standard tuning is a lot of changing, and your lower string will sound a little bit out of whack when you go up and down for like 2 whole tones for a while. So just keeping it on that is pretty convenient.
Do you think that, because I hear a lot of attachment to those instruments in terms of the context in which you got them, and I'm wondering if will we be able to think, maybe this is a question, do people think of software this way in the context of, do they identify with the time and the place and the age that they got it? And do we need something physical in order to feel that type of attachment, or is it possible to feel that with a piece of software? What are your thoughts around that?
I still feel attached to like Linux, like the initial Linux installations I did from like floppy, like Slackware and SUSE. I was like, oh, like I still feel attached to Gentoo Linux and compiling everything from source. It's like it does generate with me, and I'm just talking about myself. Like it does generate an emotional response. There's a few software instruments that have that too. When like the first time I tried out Uhe Diva and heard what that could do, and that was so inspiring. Same with like Pianotech virtual model, physical model piano from Modart. Like the first time I could hear with an MPE controller how that played the piano differently. There was a significant emotional response. So I would think yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's I'm curious. What about you guys? Like, do you guys have software like that?
I do. Speaking for myself, Ableton, which was the first DAW that I really felt attached to, that I could identify with and actually compose something coherent with. Right. Definitely attachment to that, and the way that works. Every time I jump into it, it just feels like the first car that you drive. It just feels so natural, and it feels like it feels like it was built for me personally.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
and some of that kind of comes down to kind of workflow maybe as well. Like you get some kind of connection to a particular way of working. So, and that obviously that gets connected with the user interface and user experience of the software that you're using. So,
yeah, I think so. I think that there are definitely some pieces of software that I feel that I just jump into, and Massive is another one that I feel that was one of the first synthesizers that I got, and the sounds that it could produce were just amazing and beyond what anything else was able to do at the time. Still love Massive. But at the same time, I come from a DJing background as well. And there are certain ways where I feel the reverse of that. I see people that DJ on there, that can DJ on their iPad, and I think I could never do that. I'm turntables forever. even with digital vinyl, it feels, it's good, but it's not quite the same. There are all those things that like you were talking about, the strings and the experience and all of those things. For me with DJing, it was the going to the record shop, the art on the record sleeve, the actual carrying of the crates to the clubs, even though I don't miss that part so much, but
it makes for a good story, right?
Yeah, exactly. It does make for a good story. It's better. It's much more. It's much more than just hitting purchase on a website, isn't it? So yeah, I think there is something to be said for both sides, for sure.
I mean, there is something, I think, to like committing. So like when you have some kind of investment, which might be time, effort, money, dedication, like some kind of commitment comes out of an investment. And I've noticed that myself when like purchasing synths on the iPad. Like I think I might have 80% of the synths out there. And most of them I only launch once, and so there's like out of interest because I'm in that space, but I barely use any of them, but I do purchase them. Even before I was like doing this for a living. So there is much less connection to these things because they, and that's again me. I feel part of it is because there's no effort involved. There's no like personal commitment that makes me emotionally attached to that entity. It just, like you said, I hit purchase and then now it's there, but it's also like I have to actually see it amongst the other 200 icons on that home screen. So it's there, but also not there. And so, yeah, it's an interesting topic.
Yeah.
How can you make that more tangible or more personally meaningful? Think about that.
Somehow I think that NFTs aren't the answer.
Don't get me started on
that. One question I wanted to ask you about is that you're a software engineer and you're also a product manager, which involves two different levels of thinking on a macro and on a micro level. As a person who dares to call themselves a little bit of a software developer and is more on the management side, I find that to be very challenging to think big picture and then to zoom in and think very small picture. How do you manage that? Do you have any advice in terms of how to switch those, or do you find it challenging as well?
It's challenging, but I also think it's part of my nature. Like I'm just interested in all those different things. Like I get really passionate about building the best product possible. Once the nature of a product is identified, it's like, how can this product be the best it could ever be? But this could be any nature. It could be an extremely geeky open source one file project. Like how can this be as geeky and obscure as possible? As it could be like, how can you make the most accessible digital synthesizer on the iPad that the kid could use? Like it could, or how do you make the best, like it's one of my personal projects, like how do you make the best cable holder? Like it's just like I get into that mindset and I sort of get obsessed about trying to identify that nature, like how can it be the best version of itself? And that's sort of the product manager hat. But I also I like to build stuff, which is also why I do a lot of 3D printing. But coding is so convenient to build stuff. Like you just type things and whatever you imagine can become reality, provided you figure out how to do it. And it's just so exciting. Like, well, I just did this thing and now it exists, and now it becomes that real product. So I think it's just part of my nature, but it's definitely challenging. It's challenging to like as an engineer, I want all the features, right? But it can do this and it could do that and it could hook up to that and it could do like all of the things. But then as a product manager, it's like, can't do any of that. Like, what is the one thing it should do? like no, 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 no to all these things, but how can we still make it contribute to the product? So I'm a big no guy in the product management space. I will say no by default, while my engineer will be like, no, let's do all the things. So yeah, those are usually in conflict.
Are you able, this is another question that I have that's kind of a selfish question because it's a question more for me than anything. Can you create just to create without a predetermined destination? Just to say, I'm going to go in and
no, it's horrible. Like everything turns into a product.
Yeah.
It's like, I used to be more like, oh, I'll just create and play like this piece of music and it's just there. I find that in the last 5 years, I was talking to my wife about this recently, like everything is turning into a project, like in a product. Like just recently, like 3 weeks ago, played Hero Quest for the first time, mythical board game. Like I'm a gamer, so like, yeah, let's play Hero Quest. And we play Hero Quest and it's fun, it's amazing. Like, we all have a great time. And I'm like, I want to 3D print a Hero Quest board. And so I go online and I look for all the 3D printed dungeon tiles and it's like, try them out. And it's like, but they suck. Like why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? And then I start designing 3D printable dungeon tiles. And now I'm like, oh, maybe I should make a product out of that. So now for the last 3 weeks, like my evenings have been like designing 3D printable dungeon tiles and figuring out how to like make walls with 3D sculpting software. And like, but it's in my mind, it's already a product. It's not just like, oh, I create a board for me and my buddies. No, it's like, it went immediately in 2 days time from being like, oh, let's have a 3D printable board game. And then now like, should I create a Kickstarter and which kind of video should I make and what kind of name should it have? It's horrible. So I don't know if you're dealing with similar stuff, but yeah, no, I can't be creative for the heck of being creative anymore.
Yeah, I have a problem in that. Well, I think some people think it's a problem. I'm not sure if it is, but I can't. It's very difficult for me to pick something up, whether it's a hobby or anything, without getting really serious about it. Like if I picked up the guitar, I'd have to do guitar lessons. I'd have to get some amps and and really dig into it and find out about different playing styles, find out about the whole lineage. I'd have to go for it.
Same here. Like when I learned to drive a motorcycle, it was the same thing. Like, of course, you need to get, like, it's a good idea to get motorcycle driver's lessons. But I was like, okay, but I want to do the advanced course and I want to do this course. And I want to, like, what if I do that? And like, to go on the track and like, oh, okay, I just want to drive the motorcycle to work, man. Like,
do you find that you're better at starting these things, or do you find that you're able to finish to bring these things to a finish line, or do they always just kind of start off, get to a certain point, and then they drift away, and you feel like, okay, I've expressed my, I've got all the feelings out now, and I'm good. I don't need anything to do with guitars anymore.
No, I think over the last decade, I've pretty much gone towards completing everything. It's a lot of self-discipline, and that I always feel like it's kind of a shame to not like put in the daily work and to get it to a completion point, whatever that might be, so that it becomes a thing. Like, and then that's sort of going back to what you said in the beginning. Like, I have a lot of projects, but I also try to finish everything. I try to get it to a point where I'm like, now it exists and it's a thing, and then I can let go of it. Like, okay, now it's there, and I'll cycle back to it whenever it's necessary. But it also allows me to sort of like, because usually, and that's a lot of how open source works, right? You want to scratch a personal itch. It's like, there's this thing that I want to have and I want me to do that, but nothing does it, so I'll just do it, right? And if it's never reaches that point where I feel it's to completion, I can't step back and use it. I will always be in that mindset of improving it. And that's not why I set out like on that venture. I set out on the venture to scratch my personal itch. So I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to just sit back and say, okay, now I'm a user, because it's in this spot where I feel like it's ready to be used.
And once it's ready to be used, are you able to step back and say, okay, I'm not gonna, do you feel the obligation to support, or do you feel like, okay?
It depends. It depends. Some things have a short life cycle. Some things have a, like Linstrument has been open source in the beginning, and it comes with waves. So like, okay, are we going to add new features? And like things get into a stabilization phase, and then they just sink, and then they bubble back up. Other projects I would like to continue, but like the support, like Leap Motion stuff, like the drivers aren't there anymore from Mac. They're not supporting it on the Leap Motion side. So there's no way for me to properly support this. So I just let go. Like a recent project I did, MIDI tape recorder, it's in a state that I wanted to be in, and almost get no feature requests or bug reports. So I don't feel compelled to do more, because it does the thing that I wanted it to do. So yeah.
This relates to a question in the chat from Chris Crawford asking, how do you decide what features to include in a product? Is it decided by the demographic, or are you trying to, or is it more functionality based?
For me, it usually goes back to determining the nature of the product. And it's very subjective at one point. It's like, does this respect the nature of that product? Like, will I be putting, I don't know, wings on a car? Like, it's a car, it's not a plane or a bird. Like, it would be cool if a car could fly, but it's way more than just putting wings on it. Like, that problem can be solved by putting wings on a car, right? Like, that's not how it will fly. So obviously that's kind of like a ridiculous example, but it does like happen a lot in small scale. It's like a very typical thing that just keeps popping up ever since the beginning. Ever since I started doing web design when I was like in my late teens, like, can we just add a button to make it do this thing? It's like all the time, every single time that comes up. And my default now is always, no, we're not adding a button. Like, what are you trying to achieve? And like asking that question and being really honest about it often comes up, like, you find a different answer towards just adding a feature that is just amongst the collection of features. Maybe it is something that is really not necessary in that product. Maybe it is an opportunity you missed in that product, but then just shoehorning it in will not make it work. It's supposed to figure out how to make it an inherent part of the identity of that product. How can you make this feel seamless and not just bolted on? If you can't make it feel seamless, then you should, in my opinion, you should just leave it out. It's better without than with. It's better small and focused and doing the things honestly and purposefully than just being a collection of heterogeneous features that are just like this weird, like, shapey thingy.
You bring up a great point, and I can relate a lot to that, in that sometimes I feel, because I deal with a lot of clients in plugin development, and sometimes what I feel is that a product is like a song, is a statement, right? And that sometimes what I try to explain to clients is that that statement can't be, what I find is that clients want it to be every statement. They want it to be every message. They want it to be every feeling, right? And sometimes I try to explain it like, a song is a song. You just write the song. It is what it is. It makes the statement it makes. And if it's a happy song, it's a happy song. And if you want a sad song, write another song that's a sad song.
Yeah. Very true. It's very true. Yeah.
But I find that with a lot of clients is that in the beginning, they want to make a statement. Then there's a stage where they want it to be every statement. They want it to be everything. And oh, I wish it had this feature, and I wish it had this button. And there's this inevitability that it's not going to be everything, right?
I mean, you have to ask yourself the question, like what you said, like what are you making? We're basically making things that inspire people, right? We're making effects or instruments or like that allow people to be creative. People can be creative with a spoon, like you get two spoons and you tap them together and you get an amazing performance out of it, right? You can be creative by playing percussion on the table. So it's not the features that determine whether someone feels creative or can like feel emotionally attached and productive with the product you're making. It's not the features, it's their relationship with the product. So if you can't add the features in a way that makes that relationship honest, then it's going to become a tool and not an instrument. And maybe you're a tool maker and that's cool, but then you have to be honest about it. And then like you have to decide what kind of tool you're making also. And you can't have like, it's like, you're going to reach for your hammer when you need a hammer. But if you have a hammer where you have all that other stuff just like dangling off and like trying to figure out how to hammer something while you have to get all that other stuff out of the way, you probably not buy that hammer. You're just like, give me the hammer so that I can hammer things. And then when I need to file something, I'll get my file. Like, I know, just how I look at it.
I mean, I think you always have to kind of start with some kind of clear vision of what you're trying to do in the first place. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just going to drift off into some no man's land. Like,
and something that people often have trouble with is alienating customers. Like, I feel you should probably alienate people that don't align with that vision. Like, that's just part of it. Like, it's just like when you're building a real instrument. Like, imagine you're building a guitar and someone comes along and say, "But I want to blow. Like, I'm a wind player." You're not going to say, "Hang on a minute, I'm gonna like mount this PVC pipe on my guitar." Like, you're making it a guitar. So yeah, I mean,
yeah, one of
someone might want to know. I was saying, I was like,
Then you got a bagpipe.
Yeah, a bagpipe guitar string thingy.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting spaces that I find really interesting are guitar pedals and what's happening in the modular world at the moment. It feels like there's a lot of creativity happening in that space, and they're quirky and they just do one thing, but that one thing is really interesting. And I've felt like plugins should go more for that.
Yeah.
Or does one thing, that one thing is very quirky, very difficult to make that happen in a signal chain. You need that one plugin to do that thing.
It's like the Linux mindset on the computer, right? Like, you have thousands of little tools, they all do individual things, and then you figure out how to hook them up, and all of a sudden you can make them and do like almost anything you want, which then almost like, it's like programming. Like, you have a bunch of statements that you combine in a certain way, and you can make every single thing you can imagine with it.
Yeah. We're nearly out of time, but I wanted to ask you something. So as we know, you're currently looking for a software engineer for Moog.
Actually, two, but the other position hasn't opened yet. Like, yeah. So there's going to be two hires.
What makes a Moog software engineer? What makes a person the right fit for a company like Moog?
It's usually like culturally, it has to be a good fit with the rest of the team, because we really collaborate a lot. Like, it's also like a big part of everyone that works at Moog is like we humbly work together and like recognize that we can't do anything without the help of all the others that are at Moog. And that's not just people at engineering, but it's recognizing like the people on the production floor, how they bring back like how what it is like to build those instruments and how we could improve that, and people in the commercial team, how they actually talk to the customers and to the distributors and have their own experience with those customers, and these stories that sometimes like last decades, where people remember their first Moog. There's so much about humbly working together that makes the magic happen at Moog. So that's a big part of it, which is sometimes really hard, because a part of being a software engineer is sitting by yourself in front of the computer and sort of getting into your own personal mind space. And like it's sometimes a skill that doesn't like combine well with that. And then obviously someone that's passionate about music, but also like understands that technology is at the service of music, it's at the service of the product, and it's not technology for the sake of technology. So like, I'm super interested in Rust. Like, it's an interesting programming language, but I will never use Rust for a project at Moog, because I need to support it for like 10, 20 years in software land. Is a huge amount of time. It's one of the reasons why we only very recently started using Swift. And while we mostly still use C++ and Objective-C when it's iOS stuff. So that's also often like a little bit of something that's at odds with each other, because God, as a passionate like software engineer, you're often interested in all different types of technologies and new stuff that comes out and get excited by that. But then being totally okay with just like, okay, well, what is really necessary here? And sort of seeing the benefits of maybe not using all the language features, and maybe like not writing that incredibly amazing function that is so carefully crafted, but that no one can read unless they like spend a week with it, right? Like it's this balance to recognize that like you're building software instruments that have to last. Like Moog just had its 10th anniversary, which is kind of a big deal for a software instrument on the iPad. Like it's 10 years, almost like a legacy instrument. So these things do come into play. So yeah, I don't know. It's just that's part of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I really like what you said about, it sounded like when it came to the coding aspect of it, that it's really about meat and potatoes.
Yes, and sometimes like the majority of the code is not the hard stuff. It's like once DSP is written, sometimes it's up like you spend time optimizing it, but you will not spend your whole lifetime like changing that algorithm, because that's the sound you have. You will spend your lifetime adapting it to new iOS devices, new screen sizes, new sample rates, maybe like new MIDI controllers that come out. Like you will spend that on the lifetime of your product. So it's important in order to like have a product that people feel comfortable relying upon to write it in such a way so that we can all work on it together and collaborate on it and to understand each other's code. Be humble about code reviews, be okay with pair programming, like all that sort of stuff.
You bring up a great aspect I wanted to ask you about: code reviews. Tell me about those. How are those done right? From your experience?
Well, you never have enough time to do them right, but
or how are they done wrong? That's one thing that
how they're done wrong is someone that asks for a code review and people only look for like syntactical errors and don't actually look at architecture or look for something that is fundamentally maybe problematic, because that takes like real brain cycles. Like you have to step out of what you're doing and get into the mindset of that merge request and try to identify what the nature of that merge request is, and then, okay, is that really like the purpose of what we need to do with this change? Is it like derailing other parts of the software? Is like, are there bugs? Obviously, like the worst code review for me is faking the code review, is pretending that you spent time on it, but you didn't actually spend time on it, but just like made a few comments about syntactical things and coding style things without actually spending time on it. Might as well be honest and say, hey, I don't have time to look at this. And then the way I then often do it is take a weekly meeting or something. So we have daily stand-ups and we have one weekly software engineering meeting. Take a weekly meeting to collaboratively review a chunk of code where we all take the time, set it aside, and now we're going to talk about it. So other parts that I try to do is, like, you have small changes that you know are less risky, that often just go by like that. But when there's things that might be more risky that are have the potential of introducing architectural problems, like, do these type of things, like talk them through collaboratively, as opposed to getting in that merge request and then sitting by yourself, just like commenting away, because often you're also like have 10 million other things to do. So it's often hard to spend that time on it. Yeah. And the other part that I feel make things a little bit easier is to have a culture of asking for code reviews. Like, even though I'm the senior engineer, I ask for code reviews. If I write something and I'm like, this has the potential of being risky, could you guys please look at this and give me your thoughts? And then we talk about it and sort of try to instill that culture of like, I'm not this rock, like, and no one is a rock star coder that codes in their corner. Like, we're all making a product that we can be proud of and try to make it the best it can possibly be. And code reviews is a big part of that.
Great. I had two more questions and then I'll hand it to the audience for some questions.
Okay.
One question is, let's say that I was a recent graduate from a university with my computer science degree or music computing degree. I want to work at Moog. What type of projects should I be working on? What sort of things should I be doing to make myself, to give myself the right profile to potentially work at a company like yours?
I mean, I can only talk for me because, like, I'm evaluating the candidates for my team, right? I'm a big fan of open source. So if I can see meaningful contributions, if you can show me your GitHub page, and it's not just forks of other projects, but there is something where I can see a history of commits that you did that seem meaningful, and that go towards a purpose, and I can see that you try to make a vision come to life, whatever vision that might be, that to me already sets you apart from a lot of the other people. Obviously, someone that's in the music space, that's already a musician, will be gravitating more to that type of person, because it does create it. I gotta be real, like, the real here. We're not in the financial sector, so like the funds available, we're also not like in Silicon Valley. The funds available to pay engineers are not prime rates. Like we like, musical industry is not the best paid industry on the planet, like, far from it. So the reality is that you have to be passionate about this to be okay with the whole working situation, and you have to find some personal purpose into, like, being in this space. If you are a graduate that just wants to make 6 figures immediately, and then don't go working in the music industry, like, go into another sector, because if that's what you're about. So seeing that someone has a passion in music and is like doing some personal research and trying to get some projects to completion, that to me makes them already very attractive.
Great. A couple questions from the chat. One from Griffon Helix. I have started looking into plugin development, and I'm now wondering if Clap will be the new standard for plugins. I've heard about this, but I've never checked it out much.
Clap is interesting, but it's a little bit like all new technologies I was talking about. Unless majority of hosts support it, it's, in my opinion, not worth your time. And it's like a chicken and egg situation, because it might very well be. And like the guy that's creating it, I forgot his name now. He seems like an awesome, talented guy. But if nothing can host Clap, or maybe a couple of hosts, then it's like a lot of effort for not that much gain. So yeah, maybe.
Okay. And another question from the Manuel. Are chipset features a thing in BST programming? I mean, stuff the hardware does for you in less cycles than the calculation it would take on the CPU itself. Hardware acceleration, basically.
Yeah, of course. Like Stefan said, like vectorization, trying to get neo and intrinsics in there. Like I find myself often like very privileged that like being able to focus on hardware on Apple platforms gives us access to the Accelerate framework, which is so good. Like it does vectorization and DSP calculation in such an optimized way for this platform that you kind of get a lot of things for free, but it also is made for that platform. But it allows you to have a small team to get a lot of work done that is like optimized. So yes.
Great.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can add to that. Like, I spend most of my time basically worrying about vectorization. That's the
That's a big thing.
That's the key for me to get any kind of like performance, basically, for the stuff that I do.
Yeah.
Great.
Another big one, if you've never dealt with this, is like very clearly identify what is control rate and what is audio rate. It might be a stupid one, but a lot of people forget about it. Like not everything has to be audio rate, and if you can identify it as control rate, like sometimes it makes things a lot easier, because then you can only do that part of the calculation maybe at the beginning of your buffer, as opposed to like doing it for each sample, and then you can vectorize it and these type of things.
Fantastic. We need to run, but there's one more question that I think would be important for you to answer. Was for your job posting, is there availability for international candidates as well, or do people need to be US?
Yeah, sadly, that posting is not for like remote work. So yeah, and we like for that position, we can't also sponsor the visa. So yeah, it's only for US people.
Do they have to move to North Carolina?
Mm-hmm. Yes, for that position, yes. It's just so hard. Like I said, we have a team that really collaborates day to day together, and we get inspired by the instruments that are like the hardware instruments that are being built or designed that people don't even know yet. Like there's this magic brewing where like this weird magical cauldron thing where like you're there and someone made its first sound on a new oscillator, and it's like, and it gives you ideas and you start talking about things. Or people in the factory floor like are calibrating instruments and all of a sudden come up with an amazing new sound. It's like, wow, like listen to this. Or like it can be anything. Like it's important. It's a big part of working together. And we firmly believe that the instruments we make at Moog can't be made by individuals. We make them as a team. Everyone collaborates on that, and it's hard when someone is remote, and certainly like even harder in a more junior position.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
For your time. Really interesting chat. And
well, thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you very much. And Yeah. What I will do is, if you'd like to email me your links, I will make sure to put those in the description in the video.
Okay.
And also a big thanks to Stefan, Michelle, and Craig, and also to our co-host Rachel for co-hosting. Thank you very much. Also a big shout out to our sponsors, Juice, Focusrite, and Sonics. And if you'd like to speak at one of the audio programmer meetups, once again, this is a place for everybody. You don't have to be super experienced. This could be your first VST or research project, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and your perspectives on audio programming. I have the link in the description. It's the first link right in the description of the video. So please submit. And yeah, anything to add, Rachel?
We need to say when we're going to be back next month.
Yes. Yes. Do you know offhand?
Second Tuesday. I'm thinking the 12th of April.
I always forget
Same time.
Yes. 12th of April. 12th of April, same time, same channel. And yeah, really feel really privileged to be here with you folks. And yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
Thanks for all you're doing. I think
Thanks,
your
Josh.
program is really amazing initiative.
Yes. Thank you.
Agreed.
And thank you to everybody who's tuned in as well. Thanks a lot. Please leave comments in the video and join us on the Discord, and we will see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.